Okay, we're back in Algebra 1. We're moving on to 2-4b now with solving equations with fractions. And so it's a multi-step equation. There's variable on each side, just like yesterday. But this time, we're going to deal with some fractions. So we've got a couple different types of fractions that we're going to deal with. And then we also have 3 different ways in which we can solve them. Okay, so the first way here is we have fractions as coefficients. Okay, fractions as coefficients, where we can, when we talk about coefficients, remember that's the number in front of the variable. So over here, the coefficient is 1/2, and then over here, remember, it's the coefficient is 1. So we're going to deal with the one where the fraction is a coefficient. So a couple different ways in which we can go about solving this, and the first way is just to solve as usual. So write these down here. Solve as usual. So you don't have to do anything special. You can just do it how we would normally do it. Get the variables on the left, numbers on the right. So add 7 to both sides, and then subtract an x, and isolate for x, and solve. That's one way to do it. But sometimes we can make things a little easier by getting rid of the fractions. So a second way in which we can attack this problem is to multiply by the lowest common denominator. Remember what LCD is. It's the least common denominator. So it's the lowest number that each denominator would go into equally. So in this case, we only have one denominator, and that's 2. So that would make the LCD be equal to 2, because it's the only denominator in this problem. So we can go ahead and multiply by the LCD, but just a little tip with that: if you're doing that, you're going to have to use the distributive property. Going to have to use the distributive property because you're going to end up with some parentheses. Okay, so let's try that on this example here, and let's multiply by that 2 on both sides. So if I do that, I'm going to have to multiply by everything over here. And remember, because I'm multiplying one side of the equation by 2, I'm going to have to do the other side by 2 as well. So I'm going to put parentheses here and multiply by 2. Okay, so what's that going to do for us? Well, over here, it's going to be nice and neat that these are going to cancel out, because this would be 2 over 2, which would be 1. So I'm going to have that x. But over here, I still have to do 2 times the -7 as well. So that's going to give me a -14. And on the right side, I've got 2 times x is 2x. And then 2 times 2 is a 4. Is a 4. Okay. So now from here, I can go ahead and finish solving it by getting the variables on one side and the numbers on the other side and solving from there. Okay. So we'll leave it at that for right now. The next type of fractions are terms within a fraction. Okay, so you can see these in this example. This is the whole term is within a fraction. You got a term 2x minus 5 and another term 4. They're within the fraction themselves. The same on the right side, x over 3. So another strategy we can use on this one is to cross multiply. So it'll be our third strategy, is to cross multiply. But again, when we cross multiply, we're going to try to use parentheses. Put parentheses in around the parts, around each part. And again, we're going to have to use the distributive property as well. Okay, so let's look at this one. So for this one, what we would do is, I'll get rid of this here and just give us a little bit more room to work with. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cross multiply, but I'm going to put parentheses around each part. So I got a 2x minus 5 here. And really, the other ones only have a single, either a variable or a single number, so we don't really need parentheses. But if we have whole parts like the 2x minus 5, we'll put parentheses around them. So now we're going to cross multiply here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 2x minus 5 and multiply it by 3. So now I'm actually doing the distributive property of 3 times 2x. I'm going to rewrite it here. And on the other side, you're multiplying 4 times x. So So that's what we have. Now I can go ahead and distribute and solve from there. I would distribute the left side first, combine like terms, and isolate the variable and using inverse operations to solve. So those are 3 different ways to solve it. So let's work on some examples of each, and we'll give you one of each, and we'll solve it that way. Okay, so looking at this one, I see a distributed property. I do see a fraction with 1/7, but I also see that because of the parentheses and distributed property, I'm going to do some multiplying. This might actually work out as well. So I'm just going to solve this one as usual without doing anything fancy. So let's go ahead and distribute and see what happens. So 4 times 2r is 8r. 4 times -8 is -32. Then on the right side, now I've got a 1/7 times 49r, and then I'm going to go 1/7 times 70. So if you're good in your calculator, or maybe you know your multiplication tables and you know different factors, this actually works out pretty nice that 1/7 times 49 gives you a 7. And we still have that r to deal with. And then 1/7 times 70 actually gives you a 10. So just by doing the distributive property, solving as usual, we've kind of eliminated the fractions altogether. Now it becomes just solving a multi-step equation. And we're just going to get our variables on the left. We're going to keep constant with that. So I want to take this 7r and get it to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 7r from each side. And that's going to end up giving me a positive 1r here. Minus 32 equals 10, because these are going to cancel each other out. And remember, I haven't been doing this lately, but if you want to, of course, you can draw the line through the equal sign just so you know you're working on both sides here, coming across the equal sign. And now I'm going to get the numbers on the other side, so I'm going to add 32 to both sides. And so we should get a final answer of r, because these are going to cancel out, r equals 42. Okay, so that was just by solving it as usual. So the next one here, number 2, let's try to use this one with the LCD, least common denominator. Okay, so what's that going to be in this situation? Well, remember, it's the lowest denominator that each one will go into, that each of the denominators will go into. So we have a denominator of 4 and we have one of 8. Okay, so in that case, what we're going to do is, let's get rid of those for right now, 4 and 8. Well, what's the least common number that goes into both of them, or that each denominator goes into? So a 4 actually does go into 8, and 8 goes into 8 as well. So I mean, if we would try to do that, if you multiply this by 8, you'd get cancel out and goes in twice. If you multiply this by 8, they would cancel out and you'd get a 1. So the lowest number that each denominator goes into is 8 in this case. So that's what we're going to use as our LCD to multiply by. So our LCD, our least common denominator, is 8. So one thing to point out here, though, is I'm going to multiply this side by 8, and I'm going to multiply this side by 8. But over here on the left, this is just its own separate problem first, and then I'm going to distribute whatever I get that through the 7 plus 3g. Okay, so let's work on that left side. If we did canceling, or even if you just multiplied that out, it would be 8 over 4, which is equal to 2. So as I bring this down, what I'm going to do is it's going to be 2 times 7 plus 3g, because the 8 times the 1/4 gave us our 2. And over here on the right side, you're just going to be left, these are going to cancel out, and you're going to be left with a g. And don't forget that it was negative, so it's a negative g on the right-hand side. So the next step now is we can distribute, so 2 times 7 and 2 times 3g. So the 2 times 7 is going to give us a 14. 2 times a 3g is going to be 6g. And over on the right, we haven't done anything with it, so negative g. Okay? I'm going to keep consistent with what we've been doing as far as getting the variables on the left and the numbers on the right. You'll probably notice that there's a faster way to do it if you just put the variable on the right. But just to keep consistent, I'm going to put the variables on the left. So in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a g to both sides. So now I'm going to have 14 plus 7g, and that's going to be equal to nothing on the other side, right? The g minus a negative g plus a g would give us a 0 over here. You just got to remember that equal sign is 0. Some people lose the equal sign and they don't have an equation anymore. Remember, it is an equation, so we have to keep that equal sign there. So now, like I said, the one extra step we're going to have to do is we're going to have to subtract 14 over there. And it's an extra step because we kept the variables on the left. So now we're going to have 7g equals a negative 14. And then when we divide through by 7, we'll be able to tell you that g is going to be equal to a negative 2. Okay, so that is one by using the least common denominator. If you don't like using the least common denominator, you could have tried to solve this just as is, but you're going to deal with the fractions right through. You'd have a 7/4 plus a 3/4 g on the left-hand side minus equals negative g over 8. And if you start with fractions, just make sure that you end with fractions as well. Okay? So you could do it that way. It just gets a little bit nasty with all those fractions, so sometimes it's good to use the LCD. All right, now let's do this one, problem number 3. I want to do them all one with all of them, so let's do this one where we're cross multiplying. But remember, if you're going to cross multiply, then you need fractions on both sides. So to do that, we need to have a fraction on both sides. And so how can I make this 2x a fraction? Well, I could just put a 1 over it. Or excuse me, I just put a 1 underneath it, and it'd be the same thing if I just put x plus 3 over 7 equals 2x over 1. And I could make it a fraction. Now I'm able to cross multiply. But I want to put parentheses around here because there's that's a term. X plus 3 is the whole term, so I want to put it around the part. And so now I can cross multiply. 1 times x plus 3. And over here, we've got 2x times 7 is a 14x. Well, I'm just going to write it together right now first before I do that. Don't want to skip a step. 7 times 2x. So now we're just solving a problem like we normally would. We got to distribute first. So we'd have x plus 3 over here when we distribute through that 1. And on the right side, you're going to have 14x. And on this one, I'm actually going to just make it quicker by putting the variable on the right-hand side. It makes it a little bit quicker to do that. So, like I said, you could do this vice versa. If you don't like it, that's fine. You can do it. Always keep the variable on the left. But I'm just trying to work a little faster here. So these x's are gone. So that's going to give me a 3 on the left side. And now I got a 14x minus 1x. And I'm going to have a 13x. Now I'm going to have a nasty answer here with a fraction. But because I started with the fractions when I was cross multiplying, I'm going to keep my answer in fractions. That's okay. I don't want to move to decimals in the middle of the problem. That's going to screw you up a little bit. So if you start with fractions, keep with fractions. So now my last step is I just have to divide through by this 13. And so I have a final answer of x equals 3 over 13. And I'm going to leave it like that because I started with fractions. So I'm going to end with fractions and leave my answer as 3 over 13. Okay, so that's an example of each different way, all 3 ways that we just did, all 3 ways to solve these problems with fractions. Number 4, you can try this on your own with any which way you want to do it. And that takes us to the lesson summary, which is what are the 3 ways you can solve an equation that has fractions, and then solve for x in this point and this problem here. Your coefficients are 3/4 in front of that first x, and on the right-hand side, you've got a negative 1/4 as a coefficient with x. So that makes it easier because you've only got one denominator to deal with, so you could use the LCD, or you could solve it as usual. You don't have to use any strategy here if you don't want to. Really, the only thing you probably don't want to do here is to cross multiply. So pick your choice between 1 and 2 here and solve for that one. And that does it for section 2.4b. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time.